Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. And today, Leisa Schaim is joining me, and we're going to be looking at your year ahead horoscope and astrology forecast for the zodiac sign of Gemini for the entire year of 2026. Hey, Lisa, thanks for joining me for horoscopes this year.
Hey Chris, glad to be here.
All right. So for our approach, we would recommend watching the horoscope that matches your rising sign if you know your birth time, although you can also watch the one that matches your sun sign if you don't know your birth time. So we're going to give a big picture overview of the major trends and transits and themes this year. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So here's the planetary movements calendar that shows the movement of the planets this year. And these are the main points that we're going to be focusing on over the course of 2026 in terms of the major slower moving transits. So the first one we'll focus on is the Saturn Neptune conjunction that's going to take place in February, especially because starting in January, Neptune's going to move into the sign of Aries, and then Saturn in February is going to move into the sign of Aries. And both of those planets are going to be staying there for quite a while, moving from your 10th house of career into your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances.
hmm So there's been a lot of attention you've been paying to career and public reputation for the last few years in particular. And now that that attention is moving more towards friends, social alliances, social networks, and generally your just larger social sphere. So it can be at a time where you're kind of struggling to discern between reality and things that aren't real because those are the principles of Saturn and Neptune, respectively, and they're cohabiting in that house. It can also be a time when structures that you formerly had around community, around friends, around social networks start to dissolve. But that can be an opportunity to rebuild new structures or kind of make new dreams more concrete, especially as Saturn goes through there for the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good news with Saturn and Neptune leaving your 10th house is that there's probably been some challenges that have come up over the past 3 years, ever since Saturn went into your 10th house of career starting in March of 2023, as well as some ambiguities and some nebulousness in the area of career and what your overall life direction should be ever since 2011 when Neptune first went into the sign of Pisces. So, on the one hand, the departure of both of those planets in the first 2 months of 2026 should be an alleviation both of some of the heavy, somewhat oppressive energy of Saturn going through your 10th house in the past 3 years, but also the nebulous energy of Neptune, basically, so that you should have a sudden sense of greater clarity and direction and purpose that really starts to open up after the first 2 months of 2026, which is great. The challenging thing is then that that energy kind of moves into your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances. So there may be some setbacks or some restructuring that you need to do when it comes to friends and groups. Sometimes there can be some friendships that leave your life during this time over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, or you may have to start putting in better boundaries when it comes to some of your friends if you feel like some of your boundaries are being pushed in different ways that don't feel good to you and you find yourself having to stand up for yourself more.
For sure. That can definitely happen on the level of individual friendships. And then you can also be kind of on the flip side, having some new idealism around the social sphere that can even involve social activism, for instance, for some people. And then the Saturn piece will be how to make that real, how to put your ideals into lived reality, either around
Yeah.
community or around social action.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like having a shared community built up around certain ideals or political or religious or spiritual values or philosophical values could be a really good part of this transit. The only tricky side is that with Saturn and Neptune exactly conjoining in February, there's something about that that creates a sort of reality distortion field where there may be a greater sense of not being able to tell the difference between what's real and what's not, or what's true versus what's false. That's going to really peak at this time around February. So you're going to want to be very careful if you are getting involved with new groups or new friends. You may not be able to see things as they truly are, but some of that's going to dissipate a little bit as that conjunction starts to move away after February.
hmm And if you think back to July in particular of 2025, that is when Saturn and Neptune were previously in Aries and got the closest to conjoining. So that may give you a little bit of a preview of the kinds of things that this may be about for you.
Absolutely. All right, so let's move on to our next thing, which starts in February but goes through to March, which is our first eclipse season takes place, which represents a period of major beginnings and major endings in the zodiac signs of Aquarius and then Virgo, which is your ninth house of belief and travel and education, and your fourth house of home and living situation and parents and family. So this is going to be an area of major beginnings and major endings during this time in February and March.
Right. So this eclipse, this Aquarius eclipse will be the first actual one in Aquarius. So that brings new beginnings and endings to the area of the ninth house. So your belief systems, which include your religious orientation, sort of philosophies you hold about life. It can involve things that are more concrete, like higher education. Um, Long distance travel or things or people at a distance, even if you personally do not travel. But it could be a time of opening up greater travel opportunities for you, or just generally the theme is kind of like bigger picture energies, greater exploratory energies, and newness or endings surrounding like how you view the world, worldviews.
Yeah, so this can be a great time to start a new area of study, to start a new like educational program when you're having an eclipse in your ninth house. Sometimes it can represent coming to the end of a journey that you've already been on in terms of an educational program, which can sometimes indicate like graduating from a program or completing something that's setting you up as a springboard for going on to some other career or other educational pursuit. So
Mm.
that's great. It can also be so that's the ninth house component on the one hand, but also more broadly, it has to do with major beginnings and endings when it comes to your beliefs and what you think about the world and how you view the world. And sometimes that can be starting on a new journey in terms of a political philosophy or religious philosophy or other things like that that can significantly alter your direction in life because you start subtly noticing that you're taking on different views and beliefs than what you had up to this point. But instead of it being a singular event, it's probably going to be a sequence of events that plays out over the course of the next year or so as you have other eclipses happening in Aquarius.
Right. And then the other eclipse is going to be in Virgo, which is your fourth house of home, family, living situation, private life, can be ancestry or things from the past, history. So this one is already in process. We had a couple in Virgo in 2025, and there will be one more in early 2027. So this is a series of beginnings and endings with regard to your home and living situation in particular, probably. For some people, that can be you either already moved or you're going to move house, move your living situation. It could also be renovations in your home, things that need to be fixed, you suddenly undertake. For other people, it can be more intangible, like beginnings and endings surrounding your sense of where you come from, because that's a fourth house topic, whether that's ancestry, whether that's things involving your larger family, your extended family. So, yeah, that'll be the other eclipse.
Yeah, so that'll relate to your home and living situation, especially in some major beginnings or major endings in terms of that, which could be like, you know, having a lease come up, for example, in one place so that you have to leave one living situation, but then also by necessity, that means you're going to land somewhere else and start a new beginning there. In other instances, it can have to do with your parents. If your parents are still in your life, and some major new beginnings and endings, either with respect to events that are happening in their life, if there's something really important happening with them that represents an ending and a beginning in their life, but it can also represent an ending and beginning in terms of your relationship with them and sort
Mhm.
of ending one chapter of your relationship with them and starting a new one for some reason, especially if there's anything going on there recently that sort of necessitates reassessing things and sort of starting over again.
Mhm. Definitely.
All right, so that's our eclipse season from February to March. Then we go into our next transit that begins in April, which is that the planet Uranus is finishing a very long-term transit in the sign of Taurus, and it's moving into the sign of Gemini starting in April, which is your rising sign and your first whole sign house. So Uranus is departing from a long 7 year or so transit through your 12th house, which is the place of solitude. It can also be a place that has to do with enemies or sometimes with challenges that come up in our life. And it's sort of ending a period of some unexpected disruptions that have been happening in that area for a number of years. And now Uranus is going into our first house, which is the place of self, the place of our body and physical appearance, but also our mind and our outlook in some sense as well. So this is one of the most exciting transits, having Uranus going through your rising sign, because it can represent themes of radical change and liberation and a greater drive for freedom, self-individuation, and just getting a better sense for who you are and what you want out of life over the course of the next 7 years that this transit is going to take place.
Hmm. Yeah, it can definitely be a period of experimentation more than any other Uranus transiting through any other house of the chart, because the first house is the house of self. So who you think you are, your body, your mind. And so Uranus transiting through the first house for you can be a time of experimenting with new ways of being in the world, new senses of who you could be in the world. And I like that, especially in combination with, as you were saying, Chris, Neptune leaving the 10th house, because the 10th house can be, a little bit, Neptune going through the 10th can be a little bit confusing for where you feel like your life path is going. And so I like that combo of Neptune early in the year leaving the 10th house and then Uranus going in April into the first house, because it's almost like you get, for some reason, a new opportunity to start innovating with your sense of self. And it can feel really liberating.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's like a sense of a greater or removal of a lack of clarity from the career sector and the overall life direction sector, while at the same time there's some sort of process that began last July when Uranus first dipped into Gemini of starting to have some like radical insights into yourself and like what you want out of life, as well as a deep urge to actualize those things. And, we're just finishing up with the Taurus rising people who we just did the previous horoscope for, just finishing up their 7 year transit of Uranus through the fourth. And it was really wild watching a lot of them starting at the beginning of the transit. I know at least two of them that just immediately decided to pick up everything where they had lived for most of their life and just move to a completely different side of the country, but it was a side of the country that they had always wanted to live in, and to sort of like live out their dreams of living on their own terms and living life for themselves. And whatever that took, even though it was somewhat disruptive for relationships or like home life or career things, having this deep internal sense that they find it needed to do what felt best to them and felt the most authentic that came from within themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's a transit that can look a little bit selfish, but it's like a time where you should be kind of appropriately self-focused. Like it's a time where you're supposed to be like, no, what do I want? And maybe more than at other times in your life.
Yeah, and sometimes that can lead you to make radical changes to your body, to your appearance, for example, and sometimes that can create tensions because then Uranus is opposing your seventh house sector. So sometimes there's a tension balancing like this new sense of you and who you're becoming that may be radically different than how you looked or your sense of self before. And sometimes that can create
Mm-hmm.
tensions with relationships, but ultimately it's usually for the best because it's about getting a deeper sense of who you are and what you want out of life. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a great transit.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting transit for people, and it won't happen all at once, and so that's part of the experimental quality, because it is a 7-year transit that's only a little bit underway so far, and from the second half of 2025, and so it's like you are refinding, like, or finding anew who your own sense of self and who you want to be in the world, but it will be happening through a series of kind of sudden, unexpected changes, sometimes even unexpected to yourself, maybe. But it's because it requires that experimental quality to get to the ending point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's move on to our next major transit, which is that Jupiter is going to spend the entire first half of the year in the sign of Cancer, which is your second house of money and finances and possessions, which is a positive transit. But then starting in late June, Jupiter is going to move into Leo, which is your third house of communication, short distance travel, extended relatives, but also siblings and neighbors. So it's sort of a positive transit in the first half of the year in the financial sector of your chart, then a positive transit in the second half of the year in the communication and sort of neighborhood sector of your chart.
Mhm. So Jupiter going through your second house can be an more expansive time than usual for literally just for money, for your personal income, and finances. It can be a time where you earn more money than usual, or if you are in a situation where you can ask for a raise, that's a great time to do that, because it's a time where you're more likely to pull in more money, especially if you were born during the day with the sun above the ascendant-descendant axis. That will be especially the case. Um, where it's sort of more moderated for night chart people. Um, it can also be a time where you can more positively focus your attention on how you make a living or how you manage your own finances. You can bring more positive attention towards that area in a way that can be lasting even after the transit moves on.
Yeah, definitely. So good financial stuff in terms of growth and development that started in the second half of 2025, continues through the first half of 2026. And then in the second half of the year, with that Jupiter transit in the third house, it can be a good time to take up a new language or start learning how to communicate better in different ways, like maybe through writing more or speaking or doing a YouTube channel or a podcast or something like that. But the third house also represents things like siblings and extended family and neighbors. So if there's been any issues with that up to this point recently, it can be a good time to smooth over relationships in that area of your life. And I think this is going to be a major focus of this year because we do see a lot of activity in Leo from this point forward, starting in late June, but carrying through to late this year with some other transits as well as early 2027.
Yeah, so it can bring more positive contact or positive interactions with siblings or cousins or other extended relatives. Could be a good time, for family reunions, things like that, because it involves that extended family piece. Really good time for positivity around your neighbors or immediate neighborhood. So it could be a good time to get more involved in your neighborhood for some reason. There can be yeah, those are the main things.
Yeah, definitely. Like neighborhood stuff and just like developing more connections with those in your local community or your city or your neighborhood in general. Like sometimes neighbors play a not very important role in some parts of our life, and other times neighbors actually play a much more significant role. And I think this is one of those years we'll see neighbors come up over and over again in different contexts, starting with this transit and going into others. All right,
Mhm.
so that's the Jupiter transit, and that the tail end of that Jupiter transit in Cancer in June coincides with there's a very auspicious looking Venus-Jupiter conjunction that takes place earlier in June. And we noticed this because we actually just released our 2026 electional astrology report, where we went through and we picked out the most fortunate dates of 2026 and put those all together in a sort of package and a report for people to use in order to go through and schedule things in the coming year.
Yeah, so we have at least two charts per month and sometimes more, where if you want to take important actions or start an important life project, can be, getting married or starting a new position, starting a business, things of that nature. You want the results to go as well as possible, and electional astrology will help you do that. So we've already picked out the best dates and times for you to do those things.
Definitely. So in the report, we go through each of the next 12 months. We give an overview of the astrological weather and tell you what the two best dates are to use. But we also tell you what dates to avoid because sometimes electional astrology is just as much looking out for the more difficult alignments as it is for trying to focus on the good ones. So the report includes 28 auspicious charts plus tutorials. It includes an audio, video, and written report, and you can use it for business things, for your love life, or any sort of major life events that you need to do next year in 2026. So we're launching it with a sale for just the first month where it's just $49.95, but then that price is going to go up in January to $65. So definitely get it soon if you're thinking about getting the report. And you can get it at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. All right, so that takes us into the second half of the year, where our next major transit is we get our second eclipse season, which starts in Leo and Pisces. Centered on August is when the eclipses take place, but then the actual eclipse season will bleed a little bit into early September as well. And that's taking place in your third house of communication and your 10th house of career.
hmm So that third house eclipse, the Leo eclipse, is the first one that will happen in that sign. And it's the same area that we were talking about with Jupiter transiting through Leo in the second half of the year in that third house arena. And so things involving your neighbors or immediate neighborhood or siblings, extended relatives, communication, how you communicate. Um, those are all up for sort of a beginning or an ending with regard to at least one of those topics. And I should have thrown in cars because cars come up a lot in the third house because short distance travel or your immediate neighborhood is a third house topic. And so how you get around your immediate neighborhood is also modes of transportation. So sometimes with eclipses in the third house, someone can suddenly like get a new car or bicycle even, or things of that nature, like changing your mode of transportation.
Yeah, or sometimes there can be something that necessitates like that, like a car dies or something, and therefore you have to get a new car, and that can be like a big turning point event in terms of travel during the course of the year. Similarly, with an eclipse taking place in the 10th house, this represents a major ending, but also a major beginning when it comes to career matters. And I think this is putting a final turning point on the Saturn transit, the Neptune transit we talked about earlier that departed from your 10th house and kind of like freed up and alleviated the career sector. And here with this eclipse taking place in Pisces, the final eclipse in August, it's one last major ending and one last major beginning when it comes to your career and your overall life direction. So that's probably bringing to a close some series or sequence of events that's been happening in the career sector, especially over the past few years, and then setting the foundation for one last major beginning, which could be like starting a new job or starting out in a new career direction, which sometimes with eclipses, it seems subtle at first, and it may be easy to overlook how you're actually starting something at that time that's super significant in the long term and will grow into something really elaborate. But at the time when you're just planting the seeds for that at an eclipse, when you plant a seed, it's pushed under the ground at first, so you don't realize it's going to grow into this whole huge plant later on. And that may be what takes place around this time here in August.
Definitely, definitely. And for those of you for whom career is not a big piece of your life for whatever reason, or you're retired, it can also be um, changes around how you're publicly known. So public reputation is like a shorthand for like, how do people know you publicly who are not like personal friends or family members, right? And so it can be a public role of some sort that you're beginning or ending at that time as well, whether it's paid or not.
Absolutely, yeah. So good things happening there and a continuation of the third house things. So we'll come back to that here in just a minute. So let's move on to our next transit, which is in this area of the year, especially in October and November, there's a Venus retrograde that's going to take place in the signs of Scorpio and Libra, which is your sixth house of work and health. And then Venus retrogrades back into your fifth house of children, of hobbies and fun and pleasures, and also the house of sex and sexuality and sometimes romantic things like dating. So this is going to be a significant Venus retrograde that's really occupying October and November.
hmm So it can be revisiting your connections with either People who used to do any work for you. That's even if you hire someone one-off, that goes in the sixth house. Um, it can be revisiting people you used to work with because coworkers also go in the sixth house. It's an interesting kind of overlap or almost overlap with that last eclipse in your 10th house of career because this is then another work house. So Venus retrograde being revisiting your work situations or things involving your health or pets or other animals. Then it will go back into your fifth house. And so revisiting either things involving your children, if you have children, creative projects or hobbies, things you do for fun. Um, yeah, and then it can be, people coming back from those spheres of life or coming up into greater contact with you for some reason, but it can also be reworking how you connect with those people or things in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Venus retrogrades have this backwards looking orientation where sometimes it's about looking back into the past in those areas, and other times, as you said, it's about people from the past coming back into our life for some reason. And sometimes that reason can be significant because there can be relationships that come back from the past that we resume at this time, whether it's a relationship or a connection with, let's say, a coworker or somebody you worked with in the past. Other times, because this is happening in the fifth house, it could also be a romantic connection that's coming back from the past. And sometimes that can be significant in the sense of actually resuming a relationship from the past that becomes significant again at this time. And other times it can be just looking back on reflecting on the past, even if you decide not to actually resume something, but just the idea that it has more of a backwards looking orientation, and that sometimes it's bringing up specific things from the last time that Venus went retrograde in this sector of the chart, which would have been 8 years ago, which would take us back to October, November of 2018, I believe, right?
Yes. Yeah, so 2018 was the last time 8 years prior when went retrograde in the same signs. So it can be connected to things that happened back that at that time. Um, Venus retrograde can also be a time since it's not moving forward where there can be snafus around like your social dynamics with people, and that can be specific to those areas for you during this time. So with your coworkers, there can be like a little bit of a, grinding in the gears of like how you smoothly relate or how you relate with your children if you have children, or people you're dating. But for the purpose is kind of like making you rethink like how do I want to do this going forward with those people.
Yeah, in the Venus retrograde last year, I saw a lot of ways in which the two house topics were connected between the fifth and the sixth. So, for example, there was one person that was having some health issues where it brought up the sixth house placement. But then, as a result of those health issues, their adult child moved back in with them and started living with them again to help them through that health issue. So, there was like the return of somebody of a child from the past, basically,
Mm.
connecting
Mhm.
those two house topics. Another one, because the fifth house has to do with romance and sometimes like dating or sex and sexuality, and the sixth house has to do with work, there could be some connection there between like the workplace and some sort of romance or something from the past. For the night chart people, this might be something that's more positive and presents in a more constructive fashion, where it could be like a good relationship or a good encounter. For others, it could be, if it's a day chart, it could be a little bit more tricky, where there could be some snafus or things that don't go quite as smoothly or as well as one might hope, so that you might want to be a little bit more cautious or a little bit more careful about blurring the lines between those two things.
For sure.
All right. So, yeah, that's the Venus retrograde in October and November. And now we move on to our final transit, which is that Mars starts entering its shadow period towards the end of the year because Mars is getting ready to go retrograde in Virgo and Leo. And it's not going to actually go retrograde until January. But I wanted to mention it here because Mars moves into, starting in September through December, the two signs that it's going to go retrograde in Leo and Virgo early in 2027, starting in this entire last sort of chunk of the year. So this Mars retrograde is going to happen in your third house of siblings, communication, short distance travel, and neighbors. And it's also going to retrograde in your fourth house of home and living situation and parents. So somehow it's going to potentially connect those two areas of your life. And we're going to see the build up to that in the last 4 months of 2026.
hmm So Mars getting ready to go retrograde means that it's moving more slowly as it goes through that last quarter of the year. So it'll be spending more time in your third and fourth houses, respectively. And so it's a time when you're going to put, and then after, of course, when it actually goes retrograde in 2027, it'll be there, for even longer than usual. So it's going to be a time when you're putting more effort or for some reason attention into those areas of life. So for some reason, you could be putting more focus on how you communicate, or like you said earlier, maybe learning a new language or learning new technological ways to communicate. It's overlapping with that Jupiter transit in Leo, which is kind of nice because the Jupiter transit is a really positive transit. For day chart people, the Mars transit going through the third and fourth could bring up more conflict with either siblings or extended relatives or neighbors. And then going into your fourth house, like home, family, parents. Um, but it can also just be a time where you're putting more effort into those areas for some reason. You're working on a project or something involving those topics that's going to take a while to come to fruition.
Yeah, definitely. With Mars retrogrades, they can be a little bit more tricky and there can be a little bit more tensions in these areas compared to Venus retrogrades. So you do want to be careful because there could be some tensions that arise, especially for those of you with day charts where Mars transits tend to be a little bit more tense and a little bit more prone to conflicts. There could be some tensions that connect together the topic of siblings and extended relatives with the topic of parents or the topic of home and living situation. So you could see some sort of like conflict between like your siblings and your parents, or your siblings and your living situation, or different combinations like that of those two topics. Because usually when a retrograde crosses two signs, it will connect the topics between those two adjacent houses. Another one could be like there's a challenge that arises with respect to your ability to travel, like with your car or your vehicle, that then impacts your home and living situation or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Different sort of symbolic combinations.
Yeah, I bet for a lot of Gemini rising people, it will be like neighbors and living situation, just because that's an easy combo of the third and fourth houses.
Yeah, and it's like there's so much good stuff earlier this year with Jupiter transiting through there that we know that there's a lot of growth and expansion going on. And then there's also some major beginnings and major endings from that eclipse that takes place in Leo in August. But then there's some additional component here where either you're putting in a lot of additional and extra energy and like work hours and focus on this area later in the year, or there's some sort of tension that arises that makes things not as smooth as it was earlier in the year, like in June and July, for example, when it was just Jupiter transiting through that sector of the chart.
Mm.
It can also be about like tension with communication and just needing to be careful how you communicate with people as well. Because I think a Mars transit through the third house could be sometimes getting into more like verbal altercations or saying something in the heat of the moment that maybe you regret later on.
Definitely. And it's interesting to think about, the day chart versus night chart people with that Jupiter Mars combo going through the third and fourth, or the third in particular for this year. Um, because for if you're born during the day, you'll kind of get the most tensions from that Mars transit, but also the best bounty from, right, an expansion and abundance from the Jupiter transit. Whereas for night chart people, it'll be a little more moderated on both ends. So you'll have less of the conflict, probably more of the just putting in a lot of work in that area. But also less kind of like of the positive extremes. So it's kind of like a more of a narrow band, I feel like, for the night chart people.
Yeah, that's true. The night chart people, it'll be more constructive in the Leo sector of the chart, the third house sector, when the Mars goes retrograde there. And the Venus retrograde will be more positive. But for the day chart people, you're going to have extremes of some of the most positive and some of the most challenging things happening in the third house this year. But
hmm
no matter what, for all the Gemini risings, it does seem like the third house of communication, siblings, neighbors, and short distance travel is a major recurring focus throughout this year and going into 2027.
right. And especially in the second half of the year.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's it for transits. Anything else to say for this year?
No, I think that's it. Good luck with your year. We look forward to hearing how your year went.
Yeah. All right. So those are your major transits for 2026. Like I said, if you need help planning different dates next year, then check out our 2026 Electional Astrology Report. It's on sale for $49.95, but only until January. So you can get it now at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. If you'd like to learn more about our approach to astrology, then I teach a course called my Hellenistic Astrology course for reading birth charts, and you can find that at theastrologyschool.com. But otherwise, good luck in 2026, and we'll see you again next year.